All right, so let's get started. Good morning, everyone. Let me start with first wishing you all a very happy new year, since this happens to be our first food safety conversation in 2022. Of course, what better way than to talk about pulps, which are one of the most commonly used ingredients in the food industry. We have a tradition of pulping and preservation in the country. We used to make pickles, we make pulps, jams, jellies, and it's a critical ingredient. It's a huge market as well. The fruit pulp market in India is estimated to grow to by about 124 million US dollars. So that is just the growth part of it by 2026. The mango itself will hit about $2 billion worth of a market size. And India is one of the most critical suppliers of mango pulp around the world. But not all is as hunky-dory as we'd like to believe. There are issues, and over the next 90 minutes, we'll be talking to Glenn Cox, who's the Principal Director at Food Processing Solutions, Mr. Chandrashaker, Head of Operations and Innovation at Foods and Inns, and Anusha Bhushan, who's the co-founder of Smoothies, on the safety of pulps and what are the hazards that you can experience in the ingredients. A great panel, considering everybody comes from this industry. Anusha uses this as an ingredient, Mr. Chandrashaker makes it, and Glenn has spent considerable amount of time in this space, both sort of enabling industries to make this safe. So I think we'll have a great discussion today. A little bit more about the panelists. So we'll start with Glenn. So Glenn has over 20 years experience in the food processing sector. Most of it in the largest food producer in the Southern Hemisphere, SPC Ardona, which was later acquired by Coca-Cola in 2004, and then has since been sold to a PE group based out of Sydney, Australia. It is one of the world's leading innovators in processing and packaging of deciduous fruits. It was formed as a joint venture and a technology alliance with the likes of Siam Foods, PCL Thailand, again, which is one of Thailand's largest tropical food processors, Del Monte USA, Marin Grimes Harmas, I'm bad with Spanish, at Spain. And then part of his time there included 2 years with a partner in Spain, working on a packaged food product process for European market. He now works with the Indian food sector to deliver the world's best practice technology and innovation through training and partnerships, establishing trading pathways for Indian market fruit and food ingredients for the Australian and European markets. So if you have aspirations to get into that market, I think Glenn is somebody who you should chase quite a bit. He holds a degree in chemical engineering from the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. So welcome, Glenn. Glad to have you on the conversation.
Thank you.
Moving on to our next panelist, so Mr. Chandrashaker, he's the Head of Operations and Innovation at Foods and Inns. Of course, with 25 plus years experience in fruit and vegetable processing industry, he leads 3 fruits and vegetable processing plant operations in excess of 300 crores plus processing, over 60,000 metric tons annually, no small deal. He holds a BTech in mechanical engineering with skills in F&B, food science, food technology, GMP, quality assurance, manufacturing, multi-fruit processing projects, new product development. Of course, if you spend 25 years, I'm sure there's nothing that you don't know. He has led agricultural sustainable projects as well, covering about 600 mango farmers through RFA, FSA, SAI, and Fair Trade certifications. He's very conversant with the national and the international regulations, having supplied the products to companies like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nestle, and Unilever. So he pretty much understands what the world wants. So welcome, Mr. Chandrashaker. Next, we have Anusha, who's the co-founder and CEO of Smoothies. Launched in 2016, Smoothies is an all-natural beverage made of only real fruits with no added sugar and preservatives. Anusha has an MBA from IIM Calcutta, BSc in Economics from London School of Business, and prior to Smoothies, she worked with Deutsche Bank London as part of the investment banking practice, and Bain & Company, Mumbai, as a management consultant. It's good to have you back on the panel, considering that you were there on our first panel when we ever started. So it's been a good 22 months that we haven't had you here. So good to have you back, Anusha.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And before we start, a little bit about myself. So I'm Ramesh. I run Food Safety Works. We are a food safety solutions company based out of Bangalore with offices in Mumbai and Delhi. We help our customers with implementing standards, regulatory compliance, productization services, and also deal with exports with their national and international regulations. With that, we'll get started. So we'll start with the first question to Glenn, with a very simple question, of course. We don't want to make it hard. What do you think are some of the key driving factors in this segment of the market since you've been associated with this for such a long time?
It's a really good question, and good morning to all my friends in India. As you may be aware, I'm temporarily back in Australia, so but I'm soon to join you again. It's a really good question, but I sometimes think a simple question has a complicated answer. So I'll try and keep it as simple as I can. So just a bit of background, as Ramesh mentioned, I've been involved in the designing, constructing and running of large puree-based systems across the world, especially in Australia, for end users involved in jam, beverage, baby food and confectionery. And if I think about this question, I think one of the fundamental attributes that people are looking for when dealing in this space is the issue of trust. That's an interesting word. The way I define it is just doing what you say you are doing. So as a person who works in the space, not only domestically, pan-India, but also looks to develop markets for Indian produce offshore, it's a really, really important part of what we do. And I've been in discussions recently, for example, where containers of mango puree or paste are being returned from Europe because of adulteration. I've been aware of cases where pink guava was originally white guava with some red dye. Those kinds of issues do a lot of damage to any food sector, let alone the Indian fruit puree section. So I think trust is a really important requirement. Having audit standards that support, match, and undergird that is also really, really important. So maintaining standards that are internationally acceptable, especially for export. It might be a little bit different for domestic. However, I would maintain the argument that we need to do the best in whatever environment we are in. And I think working with audit bodies that help build a really strong foundation around this whole idea of trust, the idea of making products that are in accordance with the specification, that the customer can reliably see your product delivered to that particular standard, you'll make your end user really happy. I think the other attributes I think of are innovation, so new processes, new products, clean label, preservative free, lots of terms I'm throwing around here, some purees with an inherent inbuilt health benefits, words like cold extraction, high fiber, and then all the nutraceutical issues that can come with some purees, and that comes as a function not just of the puree or the sauce itself, but how we process them. So in fact, the word puree is a very often misunderstood term. Often you'll hear words used like paste or pulp or juice or concentrate. And I think it's really important at the get-go, right at the beginning, to understand what even the word puree means. Some final remarks on this that I think is really important, and that is speed to market, being adaptable, being willing to move quickly with trends, not just, again, domestically, but internationally. And I think if you work on those fundamental, and there's lots of others I could have mentioned, but I think there's some really important ones for Indian producers of fruit or puree in any form.
Thank you, Glenn. I was speaking while I was on mute, as it happens all the time. So some great starting words. So I think trust is key. I think trust is key in every business. In the business of food, I think it becomes all the more important. Trust, innovation, I think keeping up with the trends. So yeah, all of them very, very good inputs. And we will talk about some of these as we get along with the conversation. Coming to you, Mr. Chandrashaker, you've spent an equally long time in this segment, and how have you seen it change in the last 25 years that you've been part of it in terms of the product, the processes? How have they changed over the last 25 years?
Yeah. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the opportunity given to me in this platform to participate in this thing. And coming to this, I think it's one of the challenge question that how the industry last couple of decades, how transformed into the processing side, and then systems wise, and then processing and everything. If I can make some small brief into the few points here. And the ages of this thing, when we started with a couple of decades back, that canning industry, it started with a very small scale of operations like to handling of the fruit, which may be hardly 40, 50 tons in a day. And then the process is so simple that, and this is one of the best technology available in those days to be processed mango pulp, to be extend the shelf life to this thing that can packaging. And it will be just a natural ripening will be happening by the time, and then we have to sort the fruit in different stages, and then ripened fruit will be fed traditionally. It won't be washing, and then it will be goes to the slicing of the thing to remove the stone this thing separately. Then the slices will go to the pulping stage, and then it will be moved into the steam generated open kettles for the pasteurization of the product, and then it will move into this hot filling of the cans, and then seaming. It will go for the retorting, then it will go into the storage of a thing. And if you can see the every stage of a operation, it will be the huge manpower involvement will be there, and during those days it will be some small scale operations and this thing. And subsequently, as the market demands is increasing and the canning capacity is also increasing to be catering to the international overseas market, and then this domestic markets as well. And traditionally, by the time Alfonso and Totapuri is the fruit where we are going to be processed in the very small scale this thing. And maybe the early 90s, I believe, early 90s or 90s plus, this technology was exist, and then it is coming to the aseptic, the changes to the aseptic processing technology, which is basically is a HTHT system, and this will be high temperature in short time to be based on the volume and the flow, and then time to be go for this thing. And this is very foolproof, and this thing to be address the so many hazard analysis and whatever this thing to be addressed. I think this technology was introduced in the early 90s or something, with a small scale. And at the parallelly, because the market demands is increasing and volumes of the fruit, and at the parallelly, the mango farming extent also increasing drastically in from 90s plus, 95 plus or somewhere. So the biggest challenges is coming that when we coming to the canning process, we have so much bottlenecks, and then we have so much of challenges behind to be handling the fruit as well as processing. Everywhere man intervention will be there. Then slowly the thing which is improved to the aseptic with the small capacities like 3 to 4 tons per hour. And the advantage behind the this thing in the aseptic technologies, aseptic technology was we can run the plant continuously for the 3 days. That means 70 hours plus with filling of the products. And this completely mechanization will be adopted on the early the 95 plus 2000 somewhere to be acceleration of the thing. Is a mechanized washing systems, and then fruit cutting systems, and then there is introduced of this destoners, which is separated by the stones and skins, and then it will go into the turbo refining systems, and then it will go for some decantation process, preheating. Then as well, it will go in the closed circuit of this thing to fill the bulk packaging. There's a small packaging to bulk packaging transformation which has happened. The reason is that behind that there is so much of a demands is increasing, and the canning is not enough to be catered to be more volumes to be handled in a day. And this is one of the reason. And at the same time, you can see the cost of the packaging materials is increasing and this thing. And one time it will be in the 2000 plus, it is the plants will be very good enough to be handle the larger volumes in increase the production in the daily thing, maybe 150 tons of a mango pulps we can process the thing. And the ripened fruit to the filling of the product will be completely mechanized systems, and then the involvement of the manual involvement will be very less, and then it will be a PLC based ones, and lot of controls we have in the process controls. And whereas if we can compare with the canning technology, by the time 100% canning it is going, and there's so much of a manual intervention, and then the process will be there's a lot of chances will be there. And this is the one part where the acceleration is happening into the larger volumes in terms of the packaging, the small volume to the packaging one, and the manual intervention, this thing. And one time it was the biggest challenge happened when the canning industry is improving the volumes. And we have the natural ripening, we have to depend on the thing. When we do the processing of daily 100 tons or 100 tons of a mango pulp to be packed, it will be once you can see the natural ripening process, at least we have to be maintained to be 200 tons of ripened fruit will be example 200 tons we have to process, means we have to maintain the ground stock under the natural ripening will be the 2000 tons approximately, as we can get maximum 8 to 10% only the ripened fruit out of the natural ripening of 2000 tons of ground stocks, and which will be having a lakhs of this thing, the huge manpower requirement as well, and then it will be there's no traceability of the fruits in the probably because the hips will be there under happening in the next process and this thing, and there's so much this thing is happening. When it will come to the aseptic technologies, which is accelerating the pace from the 2005 onwards, then there is the process is inadequate to be processed in hygienically and food safety wise ripened fruit to the filling of the aseptic fruit parts. And the biggest challenge came that when these plants will be capable to be filled per hour 5 tons, 6 tons of a pulp per 7 tons, then we need more enough ripened fruit which is available. And if we can go for this natural ripening, which is unmanageable, it's unorganized this thing, and huge manpower requirement will be around 500, 600 people has to be work on this thing to be this thing. Then the early 2000s started with the ripening technology of the fruit processing, this green mangoes to this thing. And this ripening technology is already available in the banana and this thing. And this is made into the terms of a thing to be triggered with ethylene ripening liquid of a FDA, which is approved one. And it will be in the controlled chambers of cooling systems to control the humidity and then temperature. And we have shrunk the ripening process from natural ripening, which will be take to 10 to 12 days of a thing to be example 10 metric tons of a lot. It will undergo for the 5 sortings, and then it will be take 10 to 12 days to be the thing. And when it's come to this ripening of the chambers with this technology, then you can have the 6 days cycle. You can entire the fruit we can ripen at a time. And moreover, in the process of natural ripening, there's a lot of thing. The fruit multiple handles, it lead to so much of damages, and this thing will be avoided. And the foreign body controls and all these things will be addressed in subsequently. It is now the canning is hardly, I believe that 10% it is there compared to the early days. It is 100% canning is going now. Canning will be the very minimal quantities compared to the volumes is at 10% right now. And the third factor, the improvement changes from the decades. When we do the small canning industries, and by the time the authority regulatory, the things will, the approvals will be there, and they will be frequently visiting to the plants and then inspections and then sampling procedure. When we go for the exports and this thing, they will be give the health certificates and all these things process is going. As the volumes is increasing, the food handling systems and capacities is increasing, then subsequently it has now transformed to the HACCP certification systems is implemented because of the more involvement of the food handling and all these hazards, whatever you would impact into the safe and clean product to be packaging the thing. Then it went to the FPO is upgraded to the FSI systems, and then at the same time that certification and the bias of a customer's requirements also increased the standards internationally as per the Asian standards, and then EU regulations is increasing the more. In the early days, I believe that the customers is not coming into the India for the during the processing period, and then there's a few people will be directly exporting to the canning products to the overseas market, and mainly the agents will be there in the different countries, and they will be take the product and then it will move. And subsequently, after some time, then the customers he started visiting to India to understand the process, how it is going, and to see the thing. And basically, the people is not in much technical this thing, and they will be the they are the mostly the commercial terms wise and this thing. They are started visiting the initial days. When these assembly technologies will be accelerated, the thing, then customers. And when we move at the same time with these HACCP certification systems first, and then it will be getting improved by the ISO 9000 QMS systems, and then subsequently because that is not recognized by this thing, and last few years we will be switch out this GFSA scheme, globally identified for SSA 22K, and this regulation which is going. And these all audits will be because of this. When we grow into the larger volumes, and the systems has to be in place to be controlled the thing. When we manage with a small quantity with some people, and then now there is a more number of the tonnage of the handling every day. And this is also parallelly a drastic change which has happened. And customers wise, overseas customers wise also, there's a lot of last 15, 20 years, there is a lot of improvements which has happened that initially they will come, and then the people will be the commercially related people, and then they will be see the plant, and then commercial discussion.
So if I may interrupt, we'll come back to the compliance in the next question with that. So I think if I were to summarize what you've kind of said about the evolution of technologies, I think one thing you talked about is moving from the canning to aseptic, right? So that was a dramatic change, of course. The volumes have significantly increased. So I think that is also another thing. And the customer's awareness, like you mentioned before we ended, this is about the customer getting aware of what the manufacturer is doing rather than relying on the trade channel. So I think all of them very, very important 3 points which have sort of, I think, made the change that we have. And I'm sure there's lots of other things that we'll cover as we go. So I think I'll come back to you, and we'll continue the discussion on that. So next, I wanted to kind of go back to Anusha, sorry. I don't know why I messed up the name. Of course, Anusha, you don't have the burden of history. You've kind of come into the market very, very recently. What are your thoughts on the thoughts and perspectives on the ingredients, the finished products, how Mr. Chandrashaker talked about how the market has changed, right? Processing technologies have changed. And also in terms of the beverage as a segment in the last few years that you've been in the industry.
Sure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience and you know what we've done. As you said, we are very young in our journey, And we've actually made changes along the way based on our own experiences in both sort of our own manufacturing practices as well as sourcing ingredients. We started smoothies to bring good quality nutrition to our consumers, and we were looking to do that in a convenient packaged form. A key problem that we wanted to tackle, because we saw deficiencies in this in urban markets, was providing good quality fruit to consumers. And we thought that an innovative way to do this would be to do this in a beverage format. So our definition of what good quality was driven first and foremost by by the term that Glenn used actually, which is clean label. And what that means for us is no added sugar, no preservatives, and fundamentally to deliver products that are free and safe from harmful chemicals that are often used in processing as well as agricultural practices. And I think Glenn said something interesting, which is, are you actually doing what you're saying you're doing? And that was really the sort of the question that sparked in our minds when we were thinking through what we want to do as we build this brand. And that was a fundamental principle upon which we actually decided to build. Can we build an honest brand, and a brand that is making promises, but that is also doing everything it can to ensure that the decisions that we make with respect to the ingredients we source and the formulations that we use are in line with those promises, right? Not just legally in line, not trying to find the loophole, but actually delivering what we want to deliver and what we're communicating to customers. And I think, and again, so, it's very easy for a brand to sort of say that I'm going to deliver this, but if the ecosystem behind you in terms of ingredients and in terms of suppliers who you can trust, if that's not intact, then no matter what you do, you will not be able to scale. You will not be able to uphold your promise to a consumer today. So when we were young and naive, we actually used fruit bought from the market for our initial formulations, because we thought, there's no better way to deliver a clean label product. If I get a fruit pulp from a supplier, how am I going to really know without having to spend a considerable amount of money and resource to really know what comes with the fruit pulp, right? Is there sugar in there? Are there added colors? Are there preservatives? There are a bunch of brands and there are a bunch of manufacturers that are very open about it, saying that yes, our product has preservative, but that's what gives you the 24-month shelf life. Or yes, we have added sugar in our products. And so the moment you apply the filter, saying that I want a product with absolutely nothing in there, right? I want 100% fruit and only fruit, and I want it to taste as good as the fruit itself, and I want it to be as safe. And the moment you apply those filters, it actually ends up becoming a much smaller ecosystem of suppliers that one, have the capability to deliver a consistent product, and two, I think who can inspire enough trust from the manufacturer to say that yes, every single batch that I get will be consistent with the quality parameters that I've defined. So incidentally, Foods and Inns actually is one of those suppliers who we work with, whose products we love. But so when we first started, we actually we started with using fruit because these were all problems that we didn't have the confidence to really tackle. But we had a lot of problems with consistency, availability of the same grade of fruit from week to week, month to month, season to season. We didn't know how to deliver or even procure a similar sensory experience across all the fruits that we were working with, not to mention costing, inconsistent microbial load. All of these things effectively meant that there was inconsistency in quality as well as uncertainty in product safety. So we actually took a step back and did a little bit of research, learned a little bit about the food processing industry, and said, I don't think the burden of the entire value chain should be something that we should take on. There is a lot of manufacturing capability and capacity that's been already installed in India. And if we're careful and if we set enough processes in place at our end, there will be a lot of benefits that we'll be able to accrue by working with food processing companies and procuring pulps and purees. So we did. I mean, we evaluated fruit pulps as an ingredient, and of course, immediately we were able to access consistent quality. This was with respect to taste, texture, color, availability throughout the year. A simple example is a mango. In India, I think mango drinks are so large, and it's not just a big market during the summer. It is one of our fastest selling SKUs throughout the year. And you can't do that without accessing good quality and good fruit pulp, which is harvested and pulped during season, as well as, of course, the fact that we now have consistency with respect to microbial safety, which is very important as you scale up, because your processing specs change accordingly for a product like ours, because we're also trying to celebrate fruit. Typically, we're actually trying to minimize how much we process the product ourselves, because as we all know, the more you process, the more it affects flavor, the more it affects color, the more it affects nutrition. And so if we know that there is a certain sort of limit on microbial load that we're getting on ingredients that we're receiving, then we can very tightly define what kind of processing specs we need to do on our end just before bottling. And that's been very beneficial as well. When it comes to finished goods, I think the finished products, we have seen very strong demand for products like ours, which effectively, I think, if you take the smoothie and the juice label out of it, they're pulpy and they're full-bodied beverages. Consumers are increasingly thinking through the quality of packaged products that they consume. They're learning to read back labels, and they're choosing healthier options. And many of these, which are clean label, and in our case, majorly comprised of fruit pulp. So when you taste a smoothies product, you're actually experiencing the fruit and all of its sort of full-bodied texture, not just the flavor of fruit. And that's something that we've actually only been able to achieve through the use of fruit pulp.
Thank you. I think it's good to hear the word trust everywhere. I think we heard it with all the speakers. I think the trust is the key. Traceability, you said. You talked about consistency, I think. And sometimes, like you mentioned, the pulp may actually be better than the fruit itself, right? Because you have less variability in the system. So yeah, it's definitely a healthy ingredient, and definitely healthy, but comes with its set of challenges in making sure that the supply chain is in place. Your suppliers are as sensitive to what you are saying or what you are asking for, but consistency being the key. So I'm sure as the industry is evolving, we are all improving on all of that, both the supplier side as well as the buyer side, more people getting more aware about the healthy things, clean labels. So I think this is something that's probably going to stay as a theme that will keep improving, not just with pulps, but with everything else as well. Coming back to you, Glenn, we've often discussed, I know in our side conversations, about the contaminations and the MRL levels in the product. I have personally talked to some of the buyers on the pineapple, and it seems to be so pineapple seems to be a notorious product. Now, if you go back to APIDA, which is our regulatory body, they say that they only allow products from farms that are certified global GAP. So we come with all of those certifications, yet we see issues coming through contamination and all of that. So why do you think we still face those challenges?
I guess I kind of answered it in the last response, because people don't do what they say they're going to do. So in fact, funnily enough, my business, or our business, has been established around, wasn't the intention, around this mandate of foreign, especially foreign organizations who want to deal in Indian agri produce. The issue is that too often they see what I call, my team will laugh at this, who are listening, a tick and flick approach to how Indian companies, not all, hopefully it's a minority, but I've seen enough evidence of it in Indian food processing, not just fruit purees, to say it's a worrying concern. And when I say tick and flick, it means that I've got a checklist that I have to tick all the right boxes. And so there tends to be this propensity to tick the box, maybe the right box rather than the correct box. And as a person like me who's been around the food and fruit industry for 25 plus years, you can walk into factories and usually in the first 30 seconds you can see that there are issues. So what you're seeing is an increasing demand for especially foreign but also local companies. For example, I have an interest in a baby food manufacturing business in India, and so issues of heavy metal pesticide residue are top of mind, issues of patulin, issues of thermophilic acidophilic bacteria in juices, for example, in some mango in particular, can be a problem. And all of those are good indicators about how well the project is not only being processed, but also how well it's being grown. So I think there are a host of challenges there. I think there's a lot of economic issues that really cause that behavior, because people are trying to compete on a global platform, especially if they're export focused, and economic decisions get in the way of quality decisions. And that's when you're in that space, you're in trouble, because you know what? You're going to get found out. And so authenticity evaluation is increasing. Not only now can Europe determine whether the product is in fact, let's pick mango, they can tell you what variety of mango. They can also tell you where the mango has been grown. So you have effectively DNA mapping for fruit. They can tell you whether sugar's been added. They can tell you whether some other fruit has been added. They can tell you whether it's Western Alfonso or Southern Alfonso. So what we have to understand is the world's becoming increasingly regulated and controlled. And because I think some producers feel like they're forced to work with unregulated and uncontrolled outsourcing practices, whether that be RM or even finished goods, they will get their fingers burnt. One last comment I'll make so we can move on is this issue around farmer education. And I think India, I love India. I'm in India because I believe in its agricultural sector and I believe in its future. That said, when you're dealing in a place like India with small land and a small land holding environment, this brings with it a particular series of challenges. So that's something else I'd like to mention. One last thought is my team just did an audit recently of a nearby fruit processing operation manufacturing chiku. Let me just say, I wouldn't want to eat the product that came out of it. And it's really a concern around the fact that you have, I think, too many what I call in Australian, using the Australian vernacular, we use the word backyard processors. So people trying to get into business. I admire their entrepreneurial spirit, but they don't know what they're doing and they will get their fingers burnt. So they're just some of the things that I observe.
Fantastic. I think that captures a lot of things. So education, I think we're also going to be talking about education. How do we make that better? I think one thing you rightly pointed out is like they say, right, the police have to run faster than the thieves to be able to catch them. And then that's sort of happening. So I think there was a time when you could probably get away with stuff, but I think we should, those are things of the past. So it is, you're going to get caught. And once that happens, that's going to be difficult. It's a loss. It's a loss in money. It's a loss in productivity. It's a loss in energy for everybody. So I think we are better off doing what we say we are doing. So I think that's probably a message that everybody should take, saying deliver on your promise. And I think that's a basic expectation from anybody. You deliver what you promise. I think that's a minimum ask that anybody would have, right? And I'm sure if you are delivering what you say you are delivering, I'm sure your buyer is confident about you. They would be willing to pay the price. So it's not always the cost game. A lot of us, I think it's expensive to do the other thing, so we would do this, but then the long-term kind of gains by being consistent is probably much larger than really taking the shortcut. So I think we just have to get used to not taking the shortcuts. So great insight. And then I'm hoping that some of the processors are listening to this and taking this advice. Now, coming back to you, Mr. Chandrashaker, we'll continue on the compliance parts and where we are talking. So, audits do indicate, like Glenn highlighted, and there is a fair amount of studies also that are there, that there is complete lack of compliance, both in phytosanitary health standards, as well as the farming practices and everything. And of course, you've been working with farmers, you said, for a fair amount of time to get them compliant with various standards. So what is your perspective on why they miss it? So education is one part, but I'm assuming you are solving that by training them. But why do they tend to kind of be non-compliant despite being explained what they need to do? Sir, you're on mute. You'll have to unmute yourself. Yes.
Coming to the customer point of audits during the processing time, the customers will be bring their own assurance persons to be audit the factory as per the systems of this thing. And at the same time, we are following the procedures and following the protocols of the EU regulations of the pesticide and heavy metals analysis. There's a two parts will be there. One, the process deviations, anything will happen. There's a some of the deviation will occur. And the sourcing of the raw material will be giving some of the deviations in the heavy metals and pesticides will come into this thing. And where we are going to be having the system of a whole industry which is following today, and we are the season beginning, mid, and end. We are going to be sending the samples of our producer products to the external laboratories, which is enable accreditations, and having these EU regulations and US FDA some of the regulations, and then as per the Asian standard. This is a procedure which will give us into where we stand that thing. In the analytical part of the fish products on this thing. Where today the US FDA is something stringent because of some of the carbonism issues will be happening in the Indian mango pulp in some areas of this thing, which will be carcinogenic, and they made very stringent controls on that one. And compared to the Asian standard will speak some MRL limits, and US FDA will be speaks in some MRL limits. Where we are fitting into this thing, how we are going to be take our external analysis part of thing. This is the process side what we are doing. And coming to the backward integration is one of the most challenges of a thing, as Mr. Glenn said, that how, because this is the Indian agriculture system is completely uneducated people, and then there's a lot of extents which is increasing. But as on today, I believe that Indian mango farming will be the traditionally which is happening. It is not much exposed to the pesticide usage of things which is not happening like grapes or other things, vegetables and grapes. But still, there is a control stage because we have a process, we have a procedures of analytical of the past 15 years. We are doing the analysis of a composite. You know that now that today France is generating 200 to 300 tons of mango pulp in a day, one lines. And where we are going to be sending a sample to a customer for a 1-2 kg sample is not enough to be address that entire 200 tons of product of day production will be represented by 2 kg sample. And the sourcing of the food, which is a different areas will come in this thing. So there is a procedures which is already developed in the industry. As the frequency intervals of the samples will be counter samples will take, and to take the composite sampling analysis will give the data base which is already available in the industry for some of the industries which we are following the standards. And as said that education to the farmers, and we are working with the farmers since last 10 plus years. We are working directly with the farmers in the form of the global gap, and we upgrade to the RFA system, Rainforest Alliance with the SAM standard, Sustainable Agriculture Network. And we are working with the Coca-Cola Atlanta for this sustainable agriculture programs. Basically, these all, and we have a horticulture team will be there, and then they will be start from the pruning to the flowering stage, and then this thing. And we are working with the horticulture departments. They seem to be educate the thing, frequent visits to the gardens and villages, and then farmers we are meeting, and then we're educating what are the banned chemicals and how much they have to be applied, what is the post-harvest intervals. These are so much of procedures which is taking place into that thing. And as a food science, if I can say, we identify some of the gardens in different sectors, and then we have done into the sustainable agriculture with working closely with the farmers and to adopt the best agriculture practices and then usage of a thing and ban chemicals, update and regulatory of a things, and how much has to be applied that thing. These all programs is going, and subsequently the same procedures is adopting by the neighboring farmers into the surrounding the community of the farmers. And you know that this will be take some time to be accelerate that thing. Now, since we are working from the 10 years plus, we are working with these programs. I believe it is multiplied by the in the same practices is going in the almost it is 5,000 acres to 10,000 acres is adopting the same practices now. And because always farmer will be think about the reduce of is the production cost of this thing and to increase the yield. And the industry is working towards on the same direction to be reduce their cost of this thing and then to increase their yields of the garden. And this direction which we are working, and still it is not alarming into that level of pesticide issues or and as said the mixing of the blending of the fruits. Mr. Glenn said that this is not at all the industry is not the everybody is not going to follow the thing. And this will be, and today there is a customers is having the completely DNA mapping of the Alfonso of the South variety as well as Western variety. There is a authenticity test is available, and then Totapuri is having authenticity test, which is a help that if anything adulteration will be happen, which can be found, which is really going to be hit to the complete thing. And today adequate analysis spot is available to prove the product will be adulterated or not.
Got it. Thank you so much, sir. So I think one thing I particularly like, or two things I particularly liked, I think one was the multiplier effect. So when we have producers like you, processors like you going and training farmers, then of course the adjacent farmer gets to know and then they follow the practices. I think that's probably what will help us multiply. And then the other thing that you talked about is, I think as long as the processors understands the farmer's pain, which is like how to improve the yield or how to improve their income. And as long as we have, because I think Glenn talked about it saying the money comes before everything else. So if we can address the fact that they can get better pricing or they can have better income by following the practices than by sort of not following them, I think that is probably the ultimate, I think, truth which will help us get there. So coming to you, Anusha, you said while stabilizing a product, you've kind of done a lot of testing and all of that, right? And you need standardization of ingredients. So what kind of variability would you see on the ingredients that you get? What are the expectations on variability that you have from the ingredient side of it?
Sure. So being a clean label brand, the aim is to retain as much nutrition in our product and to minimally process. What that typically means for us is that every ingredient that we receive, it goes through our evaluation framework. So that framework includes, does the ingredient have added sugar? Does it have preservatives? Is it free of heavy metals, pesticides? And finally, is it beyond quantified and permissive standards of sensory characteristics, as well as microbial levels? So in this space, we're basically very careful to evaluate processors against their production facility and their hygiene practices, as well as, of course, we test their final product to make sure that the product actually ticks all of our boxes. Now, so if you'll notice that a lot of these sort of issues that I've talked about, or the parameters that we test upon, are really about the processing specs, right? And one of the reasons for that is, for us especially, so so we're a very new and a relatively young brand, there is close to no traceability of where our fruit is actually coming from. Which farm or sometimes even which belt did which belt of agriculture did the fruit grow in. Especially because, so for brands like ours, we typically also purchase through intermediaries. So, just to ensure sort of some version of opaqueness so that we actually cannot go direct to source. We're not shared a lot of information with respect to where the fruit is coming from, and hence for a brand that ours is that's actually quite socially conscious, and we'd love to know that there are sustainable farming practices behind the ingredients that we use. It's a lot of work and very often futile work to actually try to find out those answers. It's so again, I think Foods and Inns today actually has a sustainable food product and a sustainability impact report. We study that, we read that, and we try to learn as much as we can to ensure that any of the fruit that we are sourcing is actually getting closer and closer to those sustainable practices. But that's most certainly, I think, something that we'd love to work on. And my sense is that we'll get closer and closer to that as our volumes get larger, and as we have more sort of market power to be able to go direct to farmer, right, and not need the intermediary. Over and above, though, I think some of the other sort of quality issues that we've seen, and some of them have been very bizarre, actually. One of them, and I remember this because this was the month of watery banana, so we pick up. We've got a strawberry and banana smoothie product, and so we pick up banana, and this is a very long time ago. So we no longer really work with the supplier anymore. But we opened up the banana and we saw that the pulp was watery. It was like banana juice, and it just made no sense because it's pulp. I mean, it's not possible. And it turns out that we'd basically been given the drums that had been filled very, very close to the cleaning in place protocol, or almost during the CIP protocol. So what kind of water is being used in CIP, plus the fact that, of course, texture was completely destroyed. I mean, we rejected the batch, but we never got our money back for that because we were much too small to really be able to reject it and give it back to the supplier. And obviously, that's a bit of an extreme sort of circumstance. We've never really had anything as drastic as that since then. But I think it's very important to keep track of, especially in something like a mango product, right? Like if you're buying 100% Alfonso, how do you know you're getting 100% Alfonso and you're not getting a mix of totapuri? It finally ends up being you need to build that sensory expertise in-house. So you can actually tell the difference. And as much as possible, mango is grown very close to Bangalore, which is where our manufacturing facility is. So, we go and we make the trips and we try and understand more and more about the farms and about where our products come from. There are certain, again, sensory characteristics such as, grit size of seeds. So, in the strawberry product or in the raspberry product, how do you define it? And how do you ensure that the product that you're getting is actually completely in line with what you asked for? And so these are some of I think the issues that we see on the sensory side of things. Of course, we work with aseptic pulp. We also work with frozen pulps. Many of these frozen pulps are actually not pasteurized. So they come unpasteurized, which comes with a little bit of risk there, but where our processing specs are calibrated to ensure that we're taking care of that microbial role. But typically, some quality issues. Sorry, there's a little bit of noise on my end. Just a second. Yeah. So typically, some quality issues that we see on that side are, if there's been temperature variation across the supply chain. So it might be a good product as it made its way to us, but along the way that we saw spoilage because we just weren't able to. Our transporter wasn't able to maintain the temperature in which it needs to be. Supplied to us. That's been an issue. While we do our own testing in-house, especially when we work with a new supplier, very often we asked for a certificate of analysis across for every single product and every single batch that we receive. And a couple of times we've seen that the certificate of analysis for 2 different batches is identical. And those are things that at times you don't think of going back to check what the previous one was, and we just happen to notice it. So it's interesting. I think what we've also learned now over the years is that, we have a very tight set of suppliers now, people with whom we have trust, people with whom we've had 0 error on product, or people who are very willing to own up to a mistake and take it back and correct it and fix it. And we're happy to work with suppliers like that. But yeah, I think we're seeing progress, and we're seeing, we've managed to set up good processes in-house to make sure that the product that we put out is good quality. But there's some way to go on that, I think, especially maybe for smaller brands, in terms of how to manage it and how to ensure that you are being given top priority as well as the larger brands are with respect to getting good quality product.
Wow, so that's quite a bit of things, as in the liquid bananas are first for me. I've heard of everything else. Then,
we were very, very young at the time. It never happened again.
Yeah, and of course the root cause to that, right? Saying that it was packed way close to the CIP. Now, as a consultant, we would expect that your CIP is in place so that everything is done and dusted, and you have some checks and balances. And for the manufacturer to say, "Oh, I just packed it too close," seems not like an ignorance, but I don't know what I can call it. So. Yeah. I know why people would be willing to take such a risk and try to get away with it. So hopefully you don't see any such bizarre stuff in the future. So all the best to you for that. Yeah. Now coming to you, Glenn, you talk a little bit about technology around the testing of it, right? And then Mr. Chandrashaker talked a little bit about the automation of it. What do you see as something, or the technology, or what do you think will help the Indian processors as we go along this journey? I'm assuming from what I heard, it's just been a 20 years journey, right? So if we started exporting in the market since the 90s, and it's been a 20-25 year journey in the process, and we have a long way to go. What kind of technology do you think is going to become critical for us to adopt?
So I think there's a couple of thoughts here. One that sort of segues nicely into some of our discussion around traceability. So blockchain technology, some of the technology, I think a discerning consumer, the kind of person that might buy the product from Anusha, would be wanting to know the story. Where did it come from? Which farm did it come from? What day was it harvested? How was the fruit treated? I think we're coming to a day where that kind of level of traceability is being demanded globally. So I think, and there's some really interesting technology coming in that space. In addition to that, of course, there's all the processing and packaging, sort of too many to mention. And I've admired some Indian companies that have attempted to move down paths, including non-thermal processing technology in areas like HPP, high pressure processing, pulsed electric fields. I was talking to someone today about another level of technology in cloudy juices that's just come out of Europe, that's being piloted around the world. I'm working with companies who are focused on high-end, high-capacity cold extraction. So not only are you avoiding thermal processing potentially in the sterilization to make the product shelf stable, but you're also looking at the avoidance of thermal processing in the extraction step. There are some challenges around that. So there's a few thoughts. I think moving towards products that are, I was talking even to someone today about apple puree, and apple puree is a commodity product. But we're working with a product right here, or not here where I am now, when I'm normally in Maharashtra, we're looking for apple puree, not just any old apple puree. We're looking for an apple puree from the Fuji variety, or a specific variety, another variety, because we want to be variety specific. So I think where you can and I guess the mango industry already does that in India, but you know, there are those kinds of opportunities. I think the other challenge I would put to people around technology is around infrastructure. So how do you build your plant? How's your plant designed? Are you running it in the back of the house, or are you running it in a factory that's going to meet the requirements of your customers? And that's a real challenge and a real conundrum for would-be processors or processors in particular, because building facilities that meet expectation is really, really important. And that takes time. I think you mentioned, Ramesh, it's a 20-year journey. Well, it's a journey that actually never stops. So the journey of continuous improvement never ceases. So there'll be some of my encouragement to look around the world, get to exhibitions, travel, develop friends in the industry, get good people to help you. So that there are some really, really interesting technology and some brave Indian companies, both very large and entrepreneurs that are working in the same space, that are doing marvelously well. Some have struggled, and of course there's some failures. But the one thing to guarantee failure is to not innovate, not to build a culture of continuous improvement. That will guarantee failure.
Fantastic. I think continuous improvement is the only constant that we have. And so if I may kind of add, so we've been around for about 10 years now, and we do see a better kind of realization amongst people on the factory layout and design. We do help with that as well. So there are people who are coming up and saying, hey, this is all good, but can I make my factory more compliant or more in line with what the standards require, so that I don't have to kind of go around and pestering my people, or because a lot of time it's the people, right, who will not follow the process because something is not there, or a hand wash station is probably in one corner and it takes just too much time or to go there, or there's something that is not available where they need. So I think people are getting conscious about the design, and I think traceability is something I think we've been talking about for at least a couple of years. Anusha talked about it, Mr. Chandrashaker talked about it. So I think the customer will demand to know where it is coming from. So I think those are all very good points to sort of invest in. Coming back to you, Mr. Chandrashaker, so despite, I know you've gone through a lot of automation, people are still very, very critical to any process or system, right? So without the people, it is not possible to implement all of those that we talk about. And one thing very unique to the pulping industry, we've talked to a lot of them, is that it's a very seasonal industry, right? So there are people here, you're working 4 months, and then suddenly there's a gap, and then people go and then they come back. So I would assume there's a lot of challenges in training people and kind of making them aware. And how do you deal with that aspect of the people's training and learning? You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. And really, this is a typical question. It's a challenging one, I believe, because years back, maybe that 10 years back or something, which is really a challenging that, because manual intervention in the form of this natural ripenings and more manpower requirement, and then these are slicing with the people, and this is the constraints was there. And subsequently, when the technology will be improved and then mechanization will be helped with the support of the ripening chambers and this thing, almost I believe 50% of the workers will be eliminated in this process. And now the manpower requirement will be the while the fruit is coming, the unloading, and then it will be fed into the ripening chambers. This is one task it is there. And now this is also, some of the industries is mechanized with the automatic bunker mechanisms, and then it will be loaded into the crates, and then with the forklift, with the palletization, and then it will be moved into the chambers. And this will be eliminated some of the risks. And also, and whereas once the process ripened fruit, the finished product to the storage conditions, and everybody, the employees will be fully trained, which is a permanent, and then there is a workers which will be contracted people also. It is fully trained now, and there is a limited people will be there in the process, right from the food washing to the finished product to storages. And second, now, unlike previous years, the plants will be running only the mango season for the 2.5 months or 3 months. And subsequently, and to the added our overheads and then the thing, and now non-mango products is improved a lot well. And today the plants was running almost, I believe, 9 months in a year. And 1 month will go for the maintenance of something. If coming to the food science stage, then we have 3 locations for manufacturing plants, and then we are really running our plants in non-mango, tropical fruits and vegetables and everything together. It is almost 320 days it is working in the 3 plants is working. So that there is a fixed people is there, and we are not dependent on the majorly on the migrant workers, which is not be there, and surrounding factory, because we are also liable as the government compliances that we have to be more occupational opportunity given to the local system, which is a fully trained, and then not like previous, like just shutting down for the 3 months and then 9 months is idle. Now it is that is understood, but still there is a challenges is there, and this is improving by the continual. I think it's a most painful job for our quality assurance team to conduct more frequent training programs and analysis, identification the particular areas, and then again to be train them, and then it's a really challenging 100%. But there is some factor. It is going to be we are in some this thing is coming to one stage, but this is ever and ever not going to be stops, and this is continuously we are hammering the people, and then you have to be insist the people to be maintain the housekeeping and all these things. This is a continuous process. This is challenges will be every industry across the globe, I believe. Yeah.
Sure. And if you need any help with training, we are there to help you. But I think a very important point is having a consistent workforce. So I think keeping the plant utilized, I think also maintains a consistent workforce. Doing training, retraining, I think it finally has to get to a point where it becomes a habit. So I think that's another thing. And we do see a lot of focus on food safety aspects of it. So we ourselves are focusing on some of this. We run a program called Safe for India, Safe for the World, where we do a lot of workshops and also awareness programs. Next month, we will be doing a workshop around food safety competency assessment models, how to kind of develop food safety culture. So that is a free workshop that will be available for quality assurance leaders or production leaders or HR to kind of come back and help. So to understand what are the various competency assessment models and how can you measure the maturity in terms of food safety. So people listening in, if you would want to go register, it's available on our learning portal academy. You can register there. We haven't clearly announced it yet, but this is the first time I'm talking about it, but you can do an early registration and we'll keep you informed. Should happen in February sometime. Now, coming on to you, Anusha, I think Mr. Chandrashaker talked about it. As we scaled, we applied more technology. But since you've been slowly scaling up, you definitely, I'm sure there'll be more technology applied as you go along. But at the moment, I'm thinking you're fairly mechanical or depending a lot on people and all of that. So then how do you kind of ensure your quality and safety parameters with limited automation?
Well, first off, what we did was make sure that we do the manufacturing ourselves. It might sound counterintuitive that we're actually trying to do something ourselves while there might be a player out there that already has the technology installed. But one, of course, it gives us business agility, but it also just allowed us to maintain a much higher standard of quality than when you do it through third party. One of the reasons for that was, every single batch of raw material that's used, we taste it. We taste every single batch pre-bottling, post-bottling. And of course, all hygiene practices, inspections, manpower training is all done to the standards that we require. So of course, the moment we had the opportunity to do so, we prioritized this very early on in our journey. We worked towards achieving an ISO certification for our manufacturing facility, and of course, you know that very well. You did it for us. You helped us with it, what it actually entailed was moving into a completely new factory, right, where the entire layout, the processes, we set up from scratch just so that we could be in line with the ISO management system. This also raised the bar for the kind of management processes that we set in place to ensure that we're set up for consistently high quality parameters, as well as a management review system. So to ensure that, and as we mentioned this before, we set a culture for continuous improvement. On the technical front, however, you're very right. We're limited in terms of how much technology we can apply at our scale. So, for example, automation is something that is very limited in our factory today, and we're also not able to, for example, apply potentially expensive or innovative sort of new manufacturing technologies. So we've taken a step back, and we've actually we've made decisions across multiple aspects of our product in the more traditional ways, which allow us to achieve good product stability. So some examples would be, very, very careful formulation. So very tight pH and Brix parameters for every single ingredient and for the finished product that we bottle. The processing specs themselves are again very, very tight and very tightly monitored during the process, as well as choosing the right barrier for the product. We bottle in glass that's fairly unique. One of the reasons for that is, of course, sustainability, and that's it's what keeps us going despite all the challenges of working with glass. But it also protects it protects product microbial safety, right, a lot more than plastic does. And it keeps the product cleaner. Glass is quite possibly the best barrier that you can consume out of, right, for a consumer. Over and above that, of course, we are very, very careful with respect to what ingredient is entering our facility, who are we buying it from, and there's a very sort of intense process that a new supplier goes through before they're even able to make it into our formulation. And that's really the key to maintaining the clean label product with as much integrity as possible.
So fantastic. I think one important thing, if I can pick out from what you said, was that processes, if I may say, can help you get quite a bit, right? So what your infrastructure, if you do not have the option of sort of mechanizing or automation, processes are something that can definitely help you a lot. And like Anusha mentioned, I think I can proudly say that she met us even before she had the product, right? So which is a very, very unique thing for us, and we are proud about it, saying we have somebody who's committed to the extent that even before the product is ready, they were talking about how do I make my process good so that I don't hit an issue. So we're really proud of having worked with you guys, designing, implementing, and we continue to work, of course. And that is all there. And I'm also a consumer of the product, so I'm happy to refer the product to everybody around as well. As we come towards our last set of questions, so for people listening in, if you have questions, please do put them on the chat in the channel that you are tuned in. We have multiple channels, but wherever you are, please post in your questions, and we will try to get them answered. Continuing with you, Glenn. So we talked a little bit about regulatory. I think Mr. Chandrashaker highlighted the European specs, and then there are US specs. And I read up a little bit on how you process your fruit versus how do you ripen your fruit versus what are your requirements. So every country seems to have its own. We talked about how India has slightly relaxed standards compared to the world. But then how do you kind of reconcile all of these differences, right? So when I'm making this product, I really don't know probably where it's going to go a lot of times. I'm sure there are pre-orders and bookings and all of that, but still, So how do you reconcile between all of these standards that are available all around?
It's a great question. It's and often a quandary and a challenge for every primary, secondary processor that works in the industry. Is how do we deal with this alignment or misalignment, perhaps, of various quality management systems, audit requirements, first party, second party, third party audits. It seems like it's never ending. And I think a few thoughts that I have around this is get the basics right. Right. So if you're so for example, and in fact, I think you've mentioned some of the issues around US gamma radiation versus ethylene oxide treated for fresh fruit. I'm done a little bit of work in pomegranates industry out of Maharashtra into Australia. Very problematic. Bottom line is what buyers are looking for is they want to know that you have, and this would be a good, not correct in every case, but get a GFSI, Global Food Standards Initiative level audit system working for you. Most commonly known in the food industry for a processor is BRC or FSSC 22000. There's, I think, 6 others that are in the system. Now, this is especially important if you're an exporter. For local production, it's not required, but it is coming. Watch this space. I'm working with partners who are working with Indian supermarket chains who are starting to demand this level of audit compliance, especially around food safety. And of course, it's not just food safety, it's the whole of business. So it's, it's child labor, it's to do with farming practices, traceability. The list is long. And of course, happening right now is this issue around embedding the right culture in businesses. So I think they're the fundamentals. Get your culture right, pick a good partner to hold your hand along the way. Hire some good people. Don't buy the cheapest food tech you can find in the market. Buy someone with a bit of experience, and I think you'll go a long way. I know there's lots of other things that get glued on or bolted on to this, so Fair Trade, Rainforest Alliance, organic. If you've got organic certification, there's other ethical and environmentally focused audit plans that exist. It's really a complex, but I think keep it simple. Get a good basic quality system that works for you, not the other way around. So, for example, when I walk into a factory, as I think I mentioned before, I think I called it tick and flick, where I walk into a laboratory and I see a form that's filled in the same way with the same exact number for every batch, for every day, for the last 5 years. I go, alarm bell, right? Because we don't live in a perfect world. We deal with products that change, not just year to year, but even week to week, variety to variety. So we have to develop a robust and workable QMS, develop some really good KPIs, live and breathe them, help everyone understand them, and that will serve you well. I have a saying, I'm full of sayings. People in my team right now that are watching this will be laughing, but I say it may be on the wall, but is it down the hall? And in English, that's simply saying I might have a nice audit certificate hanging in my entrance to my factory, but does it really exist down the hall, down in the factory? And I have another saying that goes like this: every day is audit day. So they're just some thoughts around how you overcome it. It is complicated, it is perplexing, one at a time, and they're just a few thoughts. Hopefully that's helpful to someone listening today.
Great. I think, GFSI are a good benchmark. I guess that's why they are called global. So I think compliant with that. And when you talked about the form, I suddenly remembered my physics experiments that I ran. So we had a simple pendulum experiment. We all knew you had to get a G value of 9.8. And it would never ever happen, right? So you would try bunch of experiments and you'd pick the readings which would give you the right answers because you had to kind of get into that 9.8 to 9.9, right? So even though your pendulum didn't tell you what you wanted, you always pick the data that you kind of that gave the story that you really wanted the pendulum to tell you. So I think those were college days, so it was probably okay to do that and we shouldn't be doing this at our workplace. Probably not a good idea. So moving on to you, Mr. Chandrashaker, again, briefly we talked about the varieties and mixing of varieties. So one is there is economic motivation to do that, but also is there anything you think there is enough awareness of why it should not be done, or do people not understand, or they don't have a process in place? So I'm sure you have a strong process in place, but you've seen enough industry outside. So what do you think, apart from economics, are there other motivations for people to kind of do this kind of a cross mixing? I would call it cross contamination of another form, but do you see any reasons like that?
Coming to this, maybe the mixing of the food and this thing, but Totapi and Alfonso, you know that there is a characteristics wise and then flavor, color, taste wise entirely different, and compared to the Alfonso and Totapi have different profiles. And if it is going to be mixing also, which is not going to be intentionally, nobody will not go to mix into the blended products. Unless the customers will be insist us to be make the blended of a thing, which is the thing. For instance, I will just brief you on this thing, because last 10 years plus we have an interaction with customers of overseas European customers and as well domestic. In the exhibits are
Mr. Chandrashaker, can you hear us? There might be some.
yeah.
Okay, all right. I think you're back. You faded out for a bit.
Yeah.
Yes, you are audible. You're breaking up, but I think okay. So Mr. Chandrashaker is not here. So while we wait for him, I think we'll move to Anusha, and then I think since we are very close to time, I will start a question that the audience asked for Anusha, and then we'll come back to Mr. Chandrashaker. So let's see if Mr. Chandrashaker is back. Okay, looks like we still have an issue for him connecting. So we'll come back to him, I think, as he joins. So Anusha, somebody asked a question saying, how do you ensure that every batch of the raw material you receive comply to the microbial loads or pesticide residue? I know you talked about it a little bit, but probably might be good to elaborate.
Yeah. So frankly, I think the only way to do this is to test. And testing can be, again, one of two different ways, and we do both actually. So we ask for a certificate of analysis from the supplier, and that typically has to come from not from their in-house lab, but from an external lab with the seal of approval on it. Over and above, we also send samples that we receive from suppliers to our own lab as well. And again, we don't do this in-house. We send it out to a third-party lab as well. The accuracy and the I think the credibility of, again, having that test report means a lot more than if you just do it in-house. So we do that for every ingredient, especially every new supplier that we work with, to ensure that we're working with good quality product.
Great, thank you. Another question is from Sai Krishna Reddy. He says, sir, whether traceability should be done mandatory for the clients to buy large quantities of pulp among the COA to each and every pulp, as these details are not being provided even after request. And most of the companies, he says, are GFSI compliant, yet they're not able to provide traceability information. So Glenn, you want to take that?
Easy answer. Don't buy it.
Great.
So they're not going to learn. Seriously, they're not going to learn. If you hit people over the head with the feather duster, they will not correct. You have to be, if quality matters to you, you have to treat it with the right level of seriousness. And so if people want your business and they choose not to send a C of A or a pre-delivery sample is another good strategy to get a sample that you can test from that lot. That's very common practice. Then my answer is simple: shop somewhere else.
Great. I think that makes sense. I think so there was a follow-on questions also about that, saying, well, what alternative do we have? So I guess your only alternative is not to buy from them, and probably if they face enough rejections, they will learn the lesson and come back and say, hey, this is important to the customer. So Mr. Chandrashaker, coming back to you, I think we were talking about the mixing of products. So I think you're back online, so we'll continue with that.
Yeah, you are getting me now?
Yes, now it's fine.
Yeah, this is starting because the blending of the foods and this thing, which really I want to say something before. As we interacted with the customers of this thing, during the exhibits, our customers will be visit to our factories, and basically we need to understand because of their applications or how it is going to be used product in what applications. It is going to be juices, beverage, or confectionery, dairy, or it will go for a ice creams and then bakeries like that, and maybe it will go for a mixed food drinks. Like that, we have so many interactions which is happening because everybody depending on the Totapuri and Alfonso mainly, which is our over loaded on that one and this thing. And based on the applications, and we had a discussions, and we developed recently last 5 to 6 years exclusive products of like a Sindura mango pulp, which is suitable for the processing variety, and as well as a Neelam mango pulp and concentrates, which is going to be give this thing. And because they basically the application, based on the application, we are suggesting them to suit their requirement to be fit into what kind of their finishing. And this is really helping us to be develop the new product development, like to reduce the load on the Alfonso Totapuri one, and then and domestically also we are working with the Coca-Cola to be exclusively they're using now pulp as in their beverages and this thing. And like that, this year we tried with green mango pulps to go for this thing. So what my mean is that it is not intentional and this thing, and to reduce the load of a thing, and there is so many fruit is available for the processing of a thing, which is help us to be avoid such kind of blendings and this thing, not in the economical, for this thing to be as a value added, and the competitive prices will come and will get more options if we can go for the jams and jellies or something, which is definitely is going to help for them to be this thing to be these products can be used in different applications.
So I think that's a great perspective, saying rather than treat it as contamination or mixing of pulp, I think it makes sense to segregate them, because I think finally we all have to understand that it is the customer's application, right? So mixing them is not going to help you in any way. On the other hand, you might actually get a better pricing by separating them out, because then the customer might find a new usage for it, or might find another blend for it, or another something else to do with that. So I think that's a fantastic sort of note to end on. I think we're pretty close to time. So before we wrap up, just last thoughts. So Glenn, your last 30-second soundbite.
All right, as quick as I can. Avoid what I call Indian seatbelt syndrome. That means when I go through an intersection and the police are on the intersection, I put my seatbelt on, but when I pass through the intersection, I take my seatbelt off. Seatbelts are designed to save your life, right? So the whole idea of a seatbelt, it's a safety measure. Food quality systems are the same. So it means when you have a food quality system, wear it all the time. Build a great team and get some good help. India has some amazing and fantastic opportunities. Visit other companies, not just within India, develop friends, visit benchmarking companies. And if you get an opportunity, get offshore and have a look. That's some of my final words. Thank you very much for having me today.
Great 30 seconds. Mr. Chandrashaker, before we wrap up, your last 30 seconds. Okay, I think looks like the internet decided to freak out in the last 5 minutes. Anusha, from you, as we wait for Mr. Chandrashaker.
Sure. Well, first off, thanks to everyone for having taken the time out to attend this session. It's been incredibly encouraging to see that the demand for clean label and healthy products is increasing. It's just so key to ensure a high bar for quality in the finished product, and that then also ensures a high bar for manufacturing practices for the ingredient sector. I think, again, as Glenn said, it's a very exciting country to be in, especially with respect to our depth of agriculture and the variety of fruit that we have access to. So we're in such a great position to become a dominant player in the global landscape as well, to be able to support like really good and great product innovation within our packaged foods ecosystem. So yeah, it's a great time to be a part of this ecosystem, whether you're an ingredient supplier or the finished product manufacturer, and hoping to see some really good work done in this space.
Fantastic, thank you. Mr. Chandrashaker, last 30 seconds, your advice.
Yeah, I think my internet signal something went wrong.
Okay, as soon as he starts speaking, I think the internet decides to take off. Let's try one more time.
Now you are getting Mr. Ramesh?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, because I missed it because the internet connection is very poor in this factory.
Mm-hmm.
Really, I'm thank you very much for the opportunity to given this platform to share the things, the standards to Mr. Glenn and Ramesh and Anusha. Yeah. Thank you very much, sir, for giving me the opportunity.
So it was indeed our pleasure to have you. I think the key we want to spread through this conversation is for everybody to understand the challenges and the fact that there is a lot of insights, and then there are good examples to kind of emulate. So I think hopefully we've been able to convey that message to everybody. So I want to take this time to thank all the panelists, Glenn, Mr. Chandrashaker, Anusha, for taking time out from the busy schedule, especially Anusha, who had to kind of come in at a short notice. Siddharth was going to be here, but he had an emergency to attend to. So thank you for fitting this into your calendar. And as we start wrapping up, my old pitch that I want to put it up again. So we are a food safety consulting company on a mission to keep food safe for human consumption. We help our clients with design, implementation of standards, regulatory compliance, both for national and international standards, also productization services, new product development, all of that. Food Safety Conversation is our monthly webinar. We've been at it for 22 months now. So that's fantastic to see such a great audience who keeps coming back for some of these topics. And we haven't repeated a single topic. So that's another good news. And the idea is to share knowledge from practitioners. We really don't want to hear too much from theorists, but people who are practicing all of this in their day-to-day lives on various aspects of food safety. Folks listening in, if you have a feedback, please send it to feedback@foodsafetyworks.in. If there are topics that you would like us to cover, you can send them as well on the same email ID. You can stay updated for our webinars and everything else. We are on YouTube, so you can check our past conversations on YouTube channel or on our app. So you can download our app from the Play Store, where you will have access to all of the content. We regularly share news and insights about what's going on in the world of food safety. As a company, we are committed to sharing the knowledge and providing end-to-end solutions. So if you have anything that you need, please do reach out to us. We conduct regular online trainings on various topics, including FOSTAC trainings, which are a mandatory training now in India. This week, we are doing a masterclass, I think tomorrow, on handling complaints and doing root cause analysis. To do register for that if that is something that you are struggling with. I talked about our app, so please do download. You can check out all the various things that we do on our website, www.foodsafetyworks.com. We are active on social media. Our handle is Food Safety Works. And while you are at our website, you can subscribe to our newsletter. We do send out a newsletter every week for you to stay informed. Thank you for joining in. And thank you once again, the panelists. It was great having you here. And here is wishing you safe times ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks and goodbye.